Let's go beyond the connection. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. Today we have a very interesting guest with Jordan Liebman. Now, Jordan, you've got a really interesting background. Literally the highest levels of marketing at some of the biggest brands that we've known. You've worked with Verizon and Blue Jeans, Konica, and Minolta. You've worked in technology, you've worked in telecommunications, and that's really important. Obviously, we're all about networks and network infrastructure and how do we connect networks and how do we utilize networks and how do we make each other more successful. And today, what we're going to be talking about is C-suite advice for cross-functional teams in the network infrastructure industry. There's a lot that happens, I would say, outward, how we position ourselves in the marketplace. There is a lot that happens behind the scenes. And marketing is that connective tissue between all the different departments. So we're going to get into your advice here very quickly, but I'd like to have a few things known about you before we get started. That business background is fantastic. You are also not an aspiring artist. You actually an artist. You have paintings that are up in New York and Miami and Southern California, and you sell to people all over the world. And you've got this phenomenal creative side to you, which is probably why you were allured into marketing to begin with. But you also have this very practical side. And in fact, you just, I think, published a newsletter about cross-functional teams and collaboration. So with that, I would love to turn it over to you right before we get started here and elaborate a little bit more in your own words on your background.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, Steve, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here today, and I'm really excited about the conversation that we're going to have. So like you said, I have pictured myself over what's a 20 plus year career as a transformative marketing leader. And that's been 20 plus years of experience developing these integrated strategies that just don't elevate brands, but drive customer acquisition, deliver measurable ROI. In essence, drive growth. That is a marketing leader's job at the end of the day, is to drive growth, full stop, end of sentence, no further questions asked. And so my career has really been built on what I could say is three core principles: data-driven decision-making, creative excellence, and customer centricity. So my journey actually started agency side, working at some big Madison Avenue shops like Gray and Publicis and BBDO and McGarry Bowen, which really gave me perspective from both client and agency sides and really taught me how to drive collaborative partnerships that deliver exceptional results. Eventually, that did bring me to Verizon, probably one of the best decisions I ever made in my career, where I spent a little over 8 years in these very progressive, very different marketing leadership roles where, I eventually made my way to Blue Jeans, which was Verizon's answer to Microsoft Teams and Zoom in the thick of the pandemic back in 2020. And it was there at Blue Jeans that I served as the vice president of global brand and performance marketing and led comprehensive transformation of our SaaS marketing approach, which increased trial to pay conversion by 26%, grew SMB purchase rates by almost 2x. It was absolutely tremendous. That eventually brought me to Konica Minolta, where I served as their senior vice president of marketing communications, leading an exceptional organization of 130 people across multiple disciplines within the marketing infrastructure. And my role there has really involved transforming our brand positioning, implementing digital first customer experiences, and optimizing our MarTech stack to drive significant growth. Like I said, at the end of the day, my career has been built on those three core principles of data-driven decision-making, creative excellence, and customer centricity. But all of that is absolutely nothing if you're not driving growth. And that's what I've done throughout my career, is drive growth across the brand, across the business, and across the entire organization.
Growth, to your point, when we were talking before, you had this phrase. It was the importance of making it matter, making the technology matter to the end user, right? And in a B2B environment, that's tough. That can be a tough game. And our technologies, they're not single-minded. There's a lot that is going on, and there's always product development, and there's always new launches, and there's always something that's happening There's quite a broad story here. I would love to just have your point of view on how you make it matter in the technology sector here.
Yeah, it's a question of how do we ensure that our offerings are resonating with the end users? And especially in technology, I think it's really easy to fall in love with your product's features. But at the end of the day, your end user isn't buying a feature. They're buying a future state. They're buying time, they're buying security, they're buying reputation, they're buying growth. So to truly resonate, you have to reverse engineer your messaging from their desired outcomes back to your solution. I always challenge teams to answer two simple but very critical questions. One, what is the user trying to achieve? Right. And then two, what is standing in their way? And your offering needs to show up as a bridge across that gap. I would say that one technique that really works well is using what I call consequence driven storytelling. It's not just about what happens if they buy your solution, it's about what happens if they don't. So let me give you an example. If a network security company promises 20% faster threat detection, that's good. But if you showed that delayed detection costs one company $5 million in breach penalties, that's powerful. That's compelling. That's going to resonate. It's also critical to simplify without dumbing it down. I think in tech, complexity often feels like credibility, but the real credibility comes from clarity. So if your story isn't understandable in the first 30 seconds, you're losing attention you might not get back. So I would say to resonate, you have to connect your product directly to the outcomes that your customers care about most. And when you simplify your story and center it around their ambitions, not your features, you move from selling a product to something that is much greater and much more emotional than that, which is enabling their future.
Well, does that, as I'm listening here, takes product complexity and product marketing and one sheets galore. And if you focus on what it does for them, right, and the consequences it avoids, it simplifies the message. We all in technology have a problem simplifying the message. So that was the big takeaway that I got from there. You mentioned the three things that were foundational to you, and customer centricity was one of those. There's not a company alive that doesn't say, hey, I'm not customer focused. Everybody says we are. But it's actually in the execution and putting it into action that really matters. So here's an interesting question. How do you ensure that customer centricity? That seems to be tied to then a deep understanding of the customer themselves. And how do you gather that deep understanding? We all tend to have conversations that are sales conversations and customer success conversations, and we have support tickets and we have questionnaires. We have more data engagement with the product. We have more data than we've ever had before. How do you define customer centricity, the best practices around creating that and utilizing it?
Yeah, I think customer centricity, not to rephrase your words, but it's all about putting the customer first in terms of understanding who they are, what makes them tick from a functional standpoint, from an emotional standpoint, what motivates them, what compels them. I think that customer centricity from a marketing perspective is a very strategic approach that places customers at the core of business decisions and operations, right? In tech in particular, implementing true customer centricity really requires deliberate practices across an array of dimensions. I would say first, it's about the design thinking approach. And by that, what I mean is implementing those types of methodologies that start with customer needs rather than technological capabilities. A human centered design approach focuses on empathy, ideation, and iteration based upon customer feedback. I would say the next point is that research and insights. I think it's not just a marketing thing, whether it may be marketing driven or not, but you got to establish these robust data collection systems that capture both quantitative and qualitative insights about customer behavior, preferences, pain points, regular user research sessions, surveys, analytics should all inform proper product decisions. I would say there are probably two more areas after that. So the third being cross-functional customer focus. You got to ensure that customer centricity isn't just a concern for customer-facing teams, but it is embedded across every single department and every single function of your organization. That includes engineering, that includes product, that includes operations, that includes sales, that obviously includes marketing, and it includes finance and human resources. You got to think of your organization as an extension of your brand. And if everybody is playing from the same page on the same playbook, then it's going to be a win-win. And then I think the last area is really about measuring customer success. All of this is meaningless if you don't have the right KPIs in place and you're not defining and tracking the right customer success metrics beyond those traditional business KPIs to focus on measurement that reflects actual customer value received. I think if you can build around those four pillars, and I'm sure there are more than that, you're on your way to being a very successful customer-centric business.
It's interesting because the picture that I got from what you're saying there is because you said we have to be customer centric and we have to be able to share that with the other different departments. That puts marketing at the center of this kind of cross-functional department collaboration. And the voice of the customer is the highest authority in the business. So I guess what I took away is that marketing has a role of being the leader of that voice of the customer and then translating it to all the other different departments as, so what I took away from what you're saying here as internal customers, because what product is going to need from it versus operations versus engineering versus sales are going to be different. They're going to speak different languages. They're going to have different needs. They're going to have different challenges. So what I'm hearing is that marketing plays a significant role in cross-functional collaboration throughout the company.
Absolutely.
Without marketing playing that role, to your point earlier, I love that. Like, what happens if marketing isn't playing that role?
I think someone's got to play that role. And I think it's marketing's role to truly be the voice of the customer, to represent the customer, whether that is qualitatively, quantitatively, in the room where the decisions are being made. I think that marketing, not to take away from my cross-functional brethren, but marketing is a function that wears so many different hats. We are there to drive awareness. We are there to educate. We are there to inform. We are there to ensure that the customer feels confident and secure in the decisions that they are making. And while we may not necessarily be the ones that are closing the deals or are out in the front lines, we are the first all the way to the last touch in that customer experience, accountable to the brand, to the business, to our colleagues, and to the customer to ensure that it's a successful experience and that they want to come back over and over again to use our products, use our services and solutions, become a part of our brand, but more importantly, invite us to become a part of their story. I guess jealousy, if that's a word, convert them from a skeptic to a customer to a brand zealot. And because marketing's role is so integral in that process, and because we really do need to have our finger on the pulse of our colleagues, of the market, of the customers all at once, we are playing a bit of conductor to the orchestra and ensuring that everybody knows their part and when to come in. So we really do create something that is beautiful and that people can truly enjoy. Does that make sense?
It does make total sense. The orchestra conductor, I love it. The violins have a very different part to play than the bass drums versus the flutes. And so what I'm wondering here is a lot of us don't have in our mind that we have to be able to take care of the individual needs of our internal customers. An orchestra director spends time with each different element of the orchestra to make sure there's a lead, there's a team lead, that there's a first violin, a second violin, a third violin, and that's all very structured. And you know the needs of the individuals that are playing those particular instruments. How much time, if we're as marketers, the conductor of the orchestra, do we have to spend, just like we have to spend time understanding the needs of our customers, our external customers? These are our internal customers. How much time do we need to spend understanding their particular needs in order to have it work and all departments work well as one orchestra together?
That's a really good question, Steve. I would say we have to think of it as designing both for external customers and internal customers or your cross-functional colleagues. The goal isn't to prioritize one over the other, but rather to find the intersection where both can thrive, where you create this virtuous cycle of team empowerment leading to better customer experiences, whether that is, or not whether, but when that is the external as well as the internal customer. Their success goes hand in hand, or rather, the internal customer's success is going to be driven by the external customer success. So again, it's not about prioritization or balance. It's about finding that cross section, that intersection where both can really thrive.
The whole cross-functional collaboration, you had talked about systems of checks and balances, the ability to pivot quickly in response to market changes, things like that. So when we talk about working together as the orchestra, would love to have you bring in some of those aspects too.
I would say that cross-functional collaboration really is critical for growth. If marketing, sales, product, finance, take any function across the organization aren't working together, you're not just creating friction internally, you're creating confusion for the external customer as well. I think anybody that's listening to this podcast, anybody that's been a part of this podcast, knows that in technology, especially in B2B technology, the buying journey is nonlinear, right? Prospects bounce between marketing content, sales conversations, product demos, peer reviews. If those experiences aren't synchronized, your credibility is gone out the window, completely eroded. So I think cross-functional collaboration is really about creating a seamless narrative and a consistent experience. And that means, from a marketing perspective, the business needs real-time feedback from sales about any sort of customer objections. Product needs insights from customer success about adoption challenges. And leadership needs visibility into what's resonating in the field. True collaboration isn't just about handoffs. It's about shared ownership, co-ownership. Marketing isn't there just to generate leads. We are not there to help create pretty pictures and tell great stories. We are there from the very beginning to the very end. So it's about everything through that funnel. It's about driving growth. That means that we should also help close deals. Sales shouldn't just be handing over customers. It should feed insights back into campaigns. Products shouldn't just build features. It should evangelize benefits. And I think in today's tech environment, the companies that scale aren't going to be the ones with the best product. They're going to be the ones with the best alignment around customer outcomes. Like I was saying before, growth today demands marketing, sales, product, finance, anybody operating like a single organism, synchronized, responsive, customer obsessed. Silos just don't slow you down. They're going to kill the momentum and confuse the customer. So cross-functional collaboration is critical both to the business as well as the customer success.
There's a number of things you said very important. There are two things I wanted to pull out and weave together. One, you said that the buyer's journey is nonlinear. In fact, it looks more like a spaghetti bowl. And you mentioned content as well. And in our previous conversations, we had talked about the content economy. And Forrester talks about in an ABM sales process, marketing sales process, content's foundational. Tell me a little bit about how you create content for this non-linear buyer's journey in the
Yeah.
tech industry.
It's about capturing audience attention. Plain and simple. That's what you need to do, especially in what you described as today's content economy. Content, especially today, is cheap. Anybody can go out and produce a white paper or do a 30-second video or create spec sheets, whatever it is, snap of a finger. It's attention that is priceless. We're living in the most content saturated economy in our history. The average professional sees over 5,000 marketing messages a day. That's a lot. So the question isn't how much content you create, but rather it's how much meaning you deliver in the shortest possible window. So first, it has to be immediately relevant and compelling. Your audience needs to feel within seconds. This is about me. That's what they need to be feeling. And it needs to offer a promise, a shortcut, a new idea that makes this customer's life easier or better. I think the second thing is that it has to be radically clear, especially in tech. We need to move from spec sheets to story sheets. And that means translating features into transformational outcomes. A 10x increase in network speed isn't just faster internet. It's enabling hybrid workforces. It's unlocking global collaboration. I think the third and the final area is that it should invite the audience to participate. Create something that is engaging two ways, a give and take. And great marketing isn't about a monologue. It's a dialogue. It's building these ecosystems, whether that's in the form of webinars, community threads, customer-led storytelling that keeps your brand in the conversation, not just in broadcast mode. So in a world of noise, clarity and humanity are going to be your competitive edge. The brands that win lead with extreme relevance, lead with radical clarity and emotional resonance. Every piece of content, every time they experience your brand or your business, it needs to constantly answer, why does this matter to me right now? And if you're not doing that, you're quickly falling behind and someone else is going to swoop in and do it.
I'd love to hear more. I love what you said about that the content and the marketing, it's not a monologue, it's a dialogue, which then feels collaborative, feels interactive, feels like the business is right in the middle of the heart of the conversation that's happening about the most important things that are going on in the industry versus I'm off selling what I do, because there's plenty of studies from Edelman, LinkedIn, and thought leadership and all kinds of things that talk about how the B2B buyer wants to be educated. They want to be informed. They want to be kept up to speed on what's happening in the industry and technology. It's always changing. There's a never-ending opportunity to help the buyer stay up to speed and what's going on and what's most important, what they need to know to be successful in their careers and their jobs. Tell me a bit more about monologue versus dialogue and how you're thinking about that.
Yeah, like I was saying, marketing isn't a monologue directed at passive consumers. It's fundamentally a dialogue that requires active listening and responsive engagement. I think traditional marketing has operated as a one-way broadcast. Companies created messages and pushed them out to audiences. And today, that's evolved. Effective marketing operates as a continuous conversation. Modern marketing begins with listening through social media monitoring, community engagement, customer feedback loops, data analysis. Those inputs shape marketing strategy rather than merely validating predetermined messages. I think when marketing functions as a dialogue, customers become collaborators in storytelling. Think of it as UGC, user generated content, community input on product development, interactive campaigns, all recognize customers as active participants rather than passive recipients. There's this whole notion of conversational brand presence. Social media has really gone ahead and normalized direct brand customer conversations, and the most effective brands maintain authentic voices that respond, engage, and adapt to customer interactions rather than simply broadcasting scheduled content. In a dialogue based approach, marketing campaigns evolve based on audience response. That requires flexibility, humility, and a willingness to pivot based on what resonates with customers. There's also this idea of value exchange rather than message delivery. That dialogue centered marketing focuses on providing genuine value in every interaction and creates relationships where customers willingly engage because they receive something much more meaningful in return. This shift from monologue to dialogue reflects a deeper truth, which is that customers have always had agency, but technology now amplifies their voices. Marketing that embraces that reality, Steve, builds stronger, more authentic relationships that drives both loyalty and business growth. Plain and simple.
I feel like we could go on forever. We have so much that we're passionate about here. What I would love to know, though, is if there was in the technology, in network infrastructure industry, for the folks that are listening today, from IT to CEOs, what's the one bit of advice going back to cross department collaboration and the importance of bringing that together? What's the one thing you'd want to leave us all with? The one takeaway you'd want us to remember?
Yeah, I would say going back to the whole collaboration, I would say that there are probably some tremendous consequences if there is internal misalignment. And that is something that is probably one of the most underestimated threats to business growth. It looks like slow decision making. It feels like unclear priorities. It sounds like finger pointing when KPIs are missed. But the real cost there is missed market opportunities, customer dissatisfaction, talent attrition. When sales blames marketing and marketing blames product, what's really happening is that leadership hasn't built a shared understanding of goals, success metrics, and customer needs. And I think that alignment starts with radical transparency. That's shared dashboards, unified OKRs, joint planning sessions. It grows with cross-functional wins, campaigns co-created with sales, product launches informed by marketing research. In tech, it is so fast moving, like that things happen. And the companies that scale aren't just agile, they're aligned. So I would say we got to avoid that pitfall of internal misalignment. It becomes a silent sabotage through everything that we discussed. And the cure is going to be shared goals and a deep commitment to cross-functional wins.
It's that kind of collaboration. And I have to tell you, alignment or misalignment between the C-suite is a large problem for most businesses, let alone now at the department level. And we all know that high performance teams is what creates growth. It's why VCs and private equity companies, they invest in the people first, the idea second. So this idea of collaboration that you're talking about here, so important, because if those high performance teams aren't working together and are collaborating, then we're running into a lot of the problems you just talked about. So thank you. Thank you so much. I would love to say that this podcast is about bringing different perspectives and different ideas together, a collection of experiences and insights that if we can all share, we can all make each other more successful. And I think you did that really well today. So thank you, Jordan. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for having me. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I appreciate every single moment of it. So thank you.